Christmas night, 1776. George Washington is about to gamble the entire American Revolution. 2,400 exhausted soldiers wait on the frozen banks of the Delaware River. The storm is getting worse. The river is filling with ice. 2/3 of his army will never reach the battlefield. A loyalist spy has already warned the British. By every measure, this attack should fail. But by sunrise, Washington will win one of the most important victories in American history, not because his plan worked, because it fell apart. This is the story of how disaster became the victory that saved the American Revolution. Before we talk about the crossing, we need to talk about what the American Revolution actually looked like in November of 1776. Not the way history remembers it. Not the inspiring story of patriots standing firm against tyranny. The way it actually was. It looked like a catastrophe. In the 5 months since the Declaration of Independence had been signed in Philadelphia, the Continental Army had been beaten, chased, humiliated, and nearly destroyed so completely that serious men in serious rooms were beginning to use the word finished. The British had landed 32,000 troops on Long Island in August, the largest expeditionary force Britain had ever sent anywhere, and routed Washington's forces so completely that the entire army nearly surrendered on the first day of real fighting. Washington escaped across the East River under cover of fog, which was a miracle, but escaping is not winning. It is surviving, and survival was getting harder by the week. After Long Island came the fall of New York City, then the fall of Fort Washington, where nearly 3,000 American soldiers were captured in a single afternoon. Then Fort Lee across the Hudson River, where the British moved so fast that the Americans left behind tents, cannons, and hundreds of cooking kettles, still sitting over open fires. The retreat across New Jersey that followed was not an orderly withdrawal. It was a scramble. Washington's army marched south through freezing rain and mud, losing men every day to desertion, disease, and expired enlistments. The army that had started the summer with nearly 20,000 men was down to fewer than 6,000, and that number was dropping every day. Desertion was constant. Men who had signed up to fight for independence were watching their friends die of dysentery and frostbite, marching in shoes that had worn through to nothing, eating whatever scraps they could scrounge from farms along the road. Some units had lost half their strength without ever fighting a battle. The enemy did not even need to shoot them. The Continental Army was destroying itself. The mood in the Continental Congress was close to panic. John Adams wrote privately that the cause appeared hopeless. Thomas Paine, the same man who had published Common Sense less than a year earlier, was so alarmed by the state of the army that he began writing a new pamphlet on a drumhead by firelight during the retreat. He called it The American Crisis. Its opening line captured the moment perfectly. These are the times that try men's souls. By early December, Washington had crossed the Delaware River into Pennsylvania and ordered every boat for miles to be seized or destroyed so the British could not follow. It worked temporarily. The river was the only thing standing between the revolution and total collapse. On the other side, the British and their Hessian allies controlled all of New Jersey. They had set up garrison posts in towns along the river, including a force of about 1,500 Hessian soldiers stationed in the small town of Trenton. The Hessians were German mercenaries, professional soldiers hired by King George III to fight in America because the British Army alone was not large enough to cover every theater of the war. They were well-trained, well-equipped, and well-led. Their commander at Trenton was Colonel Johann Rall, a career military officer who had fought at White Plains and Fort Washington and had never given anyone a serious reason to doubt him. Rall was brave in combat, aggressive, and confident. Maybe too confident. He had been warned repeatedly that the Americans might attempt a crossing. Each time, He dismissed it. He reportedly told one of his officers that the American rebels were nothing but a pack of farmers who could not fight a real battle. He did not bother building defensive fortifications around Trenton. Why would he? The enemy was beaten. Back across the river, Washington was staring at a calendar that was about to kill his army more efficiently than the British ever could. The enlistment terms for most of his soldiers expired on December 31st. In less than a month, the Continental Army would essentially stop existing. Men would simply walk home. Washington would be left standing on the banks of the Delaware with a handful of officers and nobody to command. He needed a victory. Not just for morale, for survival. Without something dramatic enough to convince soldiers to re-enlist and convince the Continental Congress to keep funding the war, the revolution was finished. So Washington came up with a plan. On paper, it was a good one. A coordinated three-pronged attack on Trenton, timed for the early morning hours of December 26th, right after Christmas. 3 separate forces would cross the Delaware at 3 different points, converge on the town from different directions, and trap the Hessian garrison before they could organize a defense. The main assault force, 2,400 men under Washington himself, would cross 9 miles north of Trenton at McConkey's Ferry and march south to attack the town from the north and northwest. A second force of about 700 militia under Brigadier General James Ewing would cross directly opposite Trenton and hold the bridge over Assunpink Creek, blocking the Hessian escape route to the south. A third force of about 1,500 men under Colonel John Cadwalader would cross further south near Burlington and create a diversion by attacking the Hessian outpost at Bordentown, preventing those troops from reinforcing Trenton. If everything went right, the Hessians would be hit from multiple directions, cut off from retreat, and overwhelmed before they knew what was happening. The password for the night was victory or death. That was not dramatic flair. It was a realistic description of the stakes. If this attack failed, there was no backup plan. There was no second chance. The war would be over. Christmas Day started cold and got worse. By late afternoon, a winter storm had rolled in, bringing a brutal mix of snow, sleet, and freezing rain that cut sideways across the river. The temperature dropped well below freezing. The wind howled. Chunks of ice, some of them the size of small tables, moved down the Delaware in a slow, grinding current that made the river crossing look less like a military operation and more like a suicide mission. Washington's men began loading into boats at McConkey's Ferry around 6 in the evening. The boats were a mix of flat-bottomed cargo vessels called Durham boats, 40 to 60 feet long, and smaller ferries. The Durham boats could carry about 30 men each, but loading them in the dark on a frozen riverbank, with ice pushing against the hulls, was agonizingly slow. The men of Colonel John Glover's Marblehead Regiment manned the oars and poles. These were experienced fishermen and sailors from Massachusetts, men who had spent their lives working on the cold waters of the North Atlantic. They handled the boats with a confidence that kept the whole operation from falling apart completely. Without them, there would have been no crossing at all. The soldiers climbing into those boats were in terrible shape. Many had no coats. Some wrapped themselves in blankets or scraps of canvas. A significant number had no shoes at all and had wrapped their feet in rags. These were not elite troops. They were farmers, tradesmen, laborers, and teenagers, some as young as 15, who had volunteered for a cause that was losing badly and showed no sign of improving. The fact that they climbed into those boats at all, in that weather, knowing what was waiting on the other side, says everything about what Trenton actually was before it was a battle. It was a bet placed by desperate men who had nothing left to lose. The ice on the river was the biggest problem. Large chunks floated in irregular patterns, grinding against the hulls and threatening to capsize the boats or pin them against the current. The Marblehead men used poles to push the ice away and oars to navigate between the largest pieces. Every crossing took longer than the last. By 10 at night, it was obvious the midnight deadline was not going to be met. It took nearly 9 hours. 9 hours to move 2,400 men, 18 cannons, and dozens of horses across a river that was less than 1,000 feet wide. By the time the last boat reached the New Jersey shore, it was 3 in the morning. The attack was supposed to have begun by now. They were 3 full hours behind schedule. They still had a 9-mile march ahead of them. Surprise before dawn was no longer possible. The sun would be up before they reached Trenton, and then the plan collapsed entirely. General Ewing's force, the 700 militia assigned to block the Hessian retreat at Assunpink Creek, never crossed the river. The ice was too heavy, the conditions too dangerous. His entire column stayed on the Pennsylvania side. The southern escape route out of Trenton would be wide open. Colonel Cadwallader's force partially crossed, got some men to the New Jersey shore, but could not get the artillery across. Without cannons, he decided the diversionary attack on Bordentown was not feasible and pulled his men back. The diversion that was supposed to keep Hessian reinforcements pinned down to the south never happened. That meant Washington's column was completely alone. No blocking force to the south, no diversion to the southeast. Just 2,400 exhausted, freezing soldiers marching down a dark road toward 1,500 professional Hessian troops. 3 hours late, the sun about to rise, the element of surprise gone. Pay attention to this next detail, because it explains everything that came after. Washington could have turned around. He could have looked at the situation, done the math, and concluded that the plan had failed badly enough to justify calling it off. 2/3 of the operation had collapsed. The element of surprise was gone. His men were hypothermic, some of them literally walking barefoot through the snow, leaving bloody footprints on the road. At least 2 soldiers would die from exposure during the march before a single shot was fired. He kept marching. The column moved south through the darkness in a freezing wind that numbed hands and faces within minutes. The road was unpaved. A dirt track turned to mud and then refrozen into rutted ice. Soldiers slipped and fell constantly. The men who had shoes watched the leather split apart. The men who did not left blood in the snow with every step. Henry Knox, the Army's chief of artillery, later wrote that the night was bitter cold with a cutting wind from the northwest. Another officer remembered seeing men leaning against fences and trees during brief halts, too exhausted to speak, their faces blank with the kind of fatigue that goes past discomfort into something closer to numbness. About 4 miles south of the river crossing, the column split into 2 divisions as planned. Major General Nathaniel Greene took the left wing inland along the Pennington Road, approaching Trenton from the north. Major General John Sullivan took the right wing along the River Road, approaching from the west along the Delaware. The 2 columns would hit the town from different angles at the same time. During the march, Sullivan sent a messenger to Washington, reporting that the storm had soaked his men's muskets and that the gunpowder was too wet to fire. The weapons were useless. Washington sent back a message that said 2 words: use the bayonet. Around 8 in the morning on December 26th, the lead elements of Greene's column ran into a Hessian outpost about a mile north of Trenton. There was a brief exchange of fire. The Hessian sentries fell back toward town, shouting the alarm. The surprise was not total, but it was close enough. The Hessians had about 10 minutes of warning. 10 minutes is not enough time to organize 1,500 men who were sleeping off Christmas celebrations into a coherent defensive formation. The Americans came into Trenton from 2 directions at nearly the same time. Greene's division swept down King Street and Queen Street, the 2 main roads running through the center of town. Sullivan's division pushed in from the west along the river, and Henry Knox positioned his 18 cannons at the heads of King and Queen Streets and began firing directly down the length of the town. Knox was 26 years old, a former Boston bookseller who had taught himself artillery tactics by reading books in his own shop. He had hauled cannons 300 miles from Fort Ticonderoga the previous winter, dragging them over frozen lakes and through mountain passes on ox-drawn sleds. He knew exactly how to use them. At Trenton, he placed them exactly where they would do the most damage, at the head of the two main streets, creating a kill zone that no formation could survive. The cannons, unlike the soaked muskets, worked perfectly. The Hessians stumbled out of their quarters into chaos. The streets of Trenton were narrow, icy, and now filled with cannon smoke and the sound of grape shot tearing through wooden buildings. Colonel Rowell tried desperately to organize a counterattack, forming his regiment in the streets and attempting to charge the American cannon positions at the top of King Street. It was brave. It was also futile. Knox's guns cut through the formation. American riflemen fired from windows and doorways on both sides of the street. The Hessian regimental band, which Rowell had ordered to play during the charge to rally his troops, was drowned out by the noise of artillery. The charge collapsed within minutes. Rowell was hit by musket fire and fell from his horse, mortally wounded. Without Rowell, the Hessian command structure collapsed. Some units tried to fight their way east toward the Princeton Road. Others tried to flee south toward Assunpink Creek. And here is where the failure of Ewing's crossing should have been catastrophic. The bridge over the creek was unguarded. The escape route Washington had specifically planned to block was wide open. Hessian soldiers began running for it. But here is the detail that everyone missed at the time. The creek itself was swollen with freezing water from the storm. While some Hessians did escape across the bridge and through fords south of town, the bulk of the garrison was trapped in an apple orchard on the east side of Trenton, surrounded, leaderless, and taking cannon fire from multiple directions. Roughly 1,000 Hessian soldiers laid down their weapons and surrendered. The battle was over in 45 minutes. The numbers are almost hard to believe. Washington's forces captured approximately 918 Hessian soldiers, along with their muskets, bayonets, cannons, ammunition, and regimental flags. Another 84 Hessians were killed or wounded, including Colonel Rowell, who died of his injuries the following day. Between 200 and 400 Hessians managed to escape south across the unguarded Assunpink Creek. American casualties from the battle itself: 0 killed. Not one Continental soldier died in combat at Trenton. A handful were wounded, including a young lieutenant named James Monroe, the future 5th President of the United States, who took a musket ball to the shoulder and nearly bled to death before a doctor clamped the severed artery. 2 soldiers had frozen to death during the march. That is a tragedy. But by the brutal mathematics of 18th century warfare, what Washington had just accomplished was staggering. And then there is the story of the note. A loyalist farmer had learned about the American crossing and sent a written warning to Colonel Rowell on Christmas night. The note was delivered to Rowell while he was playing cards at the home of a local merchant. Rowell took the note, saw that it was written in English, which he could not read fluently, and put it in his coat pocket without opening it. When Rowell's body was found after the battle, the unread note was still there. Whether every detail of this story is accurate has been debated by historians for 250 years. What is not debated is that Rowell had received multiple warnings about a possible American attack in the days before Christmas, and dismissed every single one of them. The problem was not that he lacked intelligence reports. The problem was that he did not believe the Americans were capable of mounting an attack. He was wrong. If you step back and look at the whole picture, the victory at Trenton is almost absurd. 2 of the 3 attacking columns failed to cross the river. The remaining column was 3 hours late. The element of surprise, the entire foundation of the plan, was technically compromised. The soldiers' muskets did not work because of the weather. The escape route Washington had specifically needed blocked was left wide open. The plan failed. Washington won anyway. He won because some failures cancel each other out. The same storm that delayed the crossing and ruined the Americans' gunpowder also kept the Hessian patrols inside, reduced their alertness, and made them assume that no sane army would attempt a river crossing in a blizzard. The delay from the slow crossing, which should have been fatal, was offset by the fact that the Hessians had relaxed their guard after Christmas celebrations. The open escape route to the south, which should have allowed the entire garrison to flee, was partially blocked by the storm-swollen creek. And the wet muskets, which should have left the Americans defenseless, simply forced them to rely on bayonets and artillery, which turned out to be far more effective in close urban combat anyway. Everything that went wrong created the exact conditions needed for everything to go right. The failure was the victory. But the battle itself is only half the story. What happened after Trenton mattered even more. News of the victory spread through the colonies like fire. For 6 months, Americans had heard nothing but bad news from the war. Defeat after defeat after defeat. And then suddenly, on the day after Christmas, this ragged, freezing, barefoot army had crossed an ice-choked river in a blizzard, marched 9 miles through the night, and captured an entire garrison of professional European soldiers without losing a single man in combat. It sounded impossible. It sounded like something out of a novel, and it gave people a reason to believe the war could actually be won. The practical effects were just as significant. Washington used the momentum from Trenton to convince many of his soldiers to extend their enlistments. He personally rode his horse in front of the assembled troops on New Year's Eve 1776 and made a direct appeal. He told them what they had accomplished and what would happen if they left. He offered a bounty of $10 to anyone who would stay for 6 more weeks. At first, nobody stepped forward. The drums rolled. The men stood in silence, staring at the frozen ground. Washington waited. Then, one by one, soldiers began stepping out of line. Then more. Eventually enough men agreed that the army survived past its December 31st expiration date. The bounty money came from the personal funds of Robert Morris, a Philadelphia financier who had scrambled to collect hard currency in the days after Trenton. Without Morris's money, Washington's appeal would have been a speech with nothing behind it. Without Trenton, there is no army on January 1st, 1777. Without an army, there is no United States. Washington did not stop after Trenton. Within days, he crossed the Delaware again. On January 2nd, he held off a much larger British force under Lord Cornwallis at a second engagement at Trenton, then slipped away from the British Army during the night by leaving his campfires burning as a deception. He marched north and attacked the British garrison at Princeton on January 3rd, winning a sharp fight that cost the British several hundred casualties and 3 regiments worth of supplies. 3 victories in 10 days. At Princeton, Washington himself rode to the front of his troops on horseback, within musket range of the British line, to rally men who were on the verge of breaking. An aide reportedly covered his eyes, unable to watch, convinced that Washington was about to be killed. He was not. The 10-day campaign did not just save the revolution, it changed the entire strategic picture of the war. The British pulled back from most of their outposts in New Jersey, abandoning territory they had spent months occupying. The Continental Congress, which had fled Philadelphia in a panic just weeks earlier, began to regain confidence. And European observers, particularly in France, started to take the American cause seriously for the first time. Frederick the Great of Prussia reportedly studied the Trenton campaign and called it the most brilliant military operation of the century. Whether he said those exact words is uncertain, but the sentiment is telling. Professional military minds in Europe were watching, and what they saw at Trenton changed their calculations. An army that could pull off something like this, under those conditions, with that level of disadvantage, was not a rabble of farmers to be dismissed. It was a force worth supporting. The French alliance, which would not be formalized until 1778, had its roots in moments like Trenton. France was looking for evidence that the Americans could actually win before committing troops and money to the cause. Trenton was that evidence. Not because it was a massive battle, it was not, but because it demonstrated something that numbers alone could not measure. The willingness to fight when everything says you should quit. The ability to adapt when the plan falls apart. Leadership that refuses to stop moving forward, even when every logical calculation says the operation has already failed. That is what makes Trenton different from every other battle of the American Revolution. Bunker Hill was brave. Saratoga was the strategic turning point. Yorktown was the final victory. But Trenton was the moment the Revolution proved it could survive its own failures. It was the night when George Washington looked at a broken plan, a frozen river, a disintegrating army, and an impossible timeline, and decided to keep going anyway. Colonel Rahl was buried in Trenton 2 days after the battle. The unread note was found in his vest pocket. The legend of the warning he never bothered to read became one of the most famous stories of the war. Washington became the most important man in America, a status he would hold for the rest of his life. And the soldiers who marched barefoot through the snow on Christmas night became the backbone of the army that would eventually win the war. The Delaware crossing has been commemorated every Christmas Day since 1853 at Washington Crossing Historic Park, on the banks of the river in Pennsylvania. Reenactors climb into replica Durham boats and row across the same stretch of water, though they have the benefit of modern cold weather gear and a river that is considerably less full of ice. Thousands of spectators line the banks every year, standing in the same cold that Washington's men endured, watching the boats push out into the current. The original crossing point is about 30 miles north of Philadelphia. The march route south to Trenton still exists as a road you can drive today. You can stand in the spot where Washington climbed out of his boat, look across the river to the Pennsylvania side, and the distance feels impossibly short for an operation that took 9 hours and nearly failed before it started. Trenton did not win the American Revolution. It saved it. It proved that a plan does not have to work perfectly to produce a perfect outcome. It proved that weather, failure, and chaos are not always the enemy. Sometimes they are the conditions that make victory possible in the first place. And it proved that the most important decision a leader can make is not whether the plan is still intact, but whether the objective is still worth fighting for. Everything about this operation said stop. Washington said, go. That decision, that single stubborn refusal to accept a rational conclusion, changed the trajectory of a war, the fate of a nation, and the course of history. If this story changed how you think about the American Revolution, hit subscribe and drop a comment below. Which moment from the Revolution do you want us to cover next? And if you learned something today, smash that like button so more people can find this channel.